Welcome to the Sound of Movement podcast. Today we're talking about program design, specifically for training for calisthenics and other skills when you have an injury. This is something that I have learned so much about in the last few years from having the pleasure of working closely with two exceptional physios. Stick around. What's up, everyone? It's time to rock. If you're new to the tribe, Rich is behind the mix. Phil is across the table from me, and my name is Rad Burmeister. We are Unity Gym, experts at turning driven people into athletes. This episode is brought to you by the Unify Movement System, the only online program effectively balancing strength, flexibility, and fitness so you can unleash your inner athlete. You can get daily coaching by us, plus our epic Foundations Prep program and revolutionary structural blueprint to create your ideal program and optimize your performance. As a valued listener, you can use the link in the description to get your first month free. Also, I'm very excited to announce that right now we have an epic 72-hour flash sale on. It's for our masterclasses. You can get the handstand masterclass, press to handstand, the gymnastics rings masterclass, the pull-up masterclass, the flexibility masterclass. We've got a whole bunch of amazing programs that are designed to nail specific skills and movement goals. You can grab it right now if you go to that UMS Movement Mastermind on Facebook and click the link. The offer for that ends in about 48 hours. Now, before we get started, warm welcome if you're on the live stream in the UMS Movement Mastermind Facebook group. Leave a comment and we'll send you some love. Remember that anyone can join and interact. And lastly, a shout out to our YouTube athletes catching the replay. Hit the like button to support the channel and subscribe if you like what you see. Okay, joining us today is Phil White from ADPT Physio. How are you, bro?
Very well.
Yeah.
Very well. I've really enjoyed these topics this week. So
yeah, they're good ones, hey? There's a lot that you can add to them.
Yeah, and now especially we're talking about injuries. I'm excited. So if you are watching live, do make sure you get any questions in you have specifically, because it's always good to use cases of people who are watching. So let us know about your experience of training for calisthenics or other skills and has an injury put you off your training, or have you stuck with it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, look, we wanted, because we've been talking about program design today, and the reason why I wanted to talk about this one is because this is something that I got a lot of personal experience with. I decided that I was going to learn how to do calisthenics about 5 years ago, and my journey uncovered a whole bunch of issues in my body that had really, like, they're underlying issues that I've had for 20 years from injuries that I did 20 years ago that I had to reflect back on and go, oh, wow, this must be related to that. I never did anything about it. And I really had no idea how to deal with it. And it was from working closely with you and Nilesh and creating these programs that we have now that has allowed me to understand the process. And if I just pre-frame this a little bit, my idea, like the first injury that I remember getting with calisthenics was I had a wrist injury on my right wrist, and it got so bad when I was doing handstands that I couldn't do handstands at all for about 6 months. And I eventually went and saw Leroy. This is when you were still studying, so I couldn't see you, Phil, as a physio, and you were very busy back then. So Leroy is a friend of ours who's an exceptional physiotherapist. He's actually the connection that got Phil and Nilesh together, and he was one of Phil's mentors, would you call him? Is it?
Yeah, he was one of my physios when I was a patient, and then I just thought, I want to learn from this guy.
Yeah. He's an amazing guy. When I went and saw him, he looked at my handstand and he looked at things that were going on, and he said, wow, what's happening is you're favoring the right side so much, you're putting all the weight in the right side that the right wrist is just getting overloaded. That's what the problem is. And this led me to, understanding this injury that I've had in my left shoulder. But the idea is that what I did incorrectly originally was, okay, I'm just going to rest this until the pain goes away. And of course, the pain goes away, the inflammation goes down, you feel good, then you go back and it just comes back again. And what I understand now about it was that I needed to modify the micro loading. So in this case, I needed to strengthen all of the left side of my body and learn how to shift the weight so that it was evenly distributed with both hands. And that's a strategy that's helped me with many, many other injuries. Forearm tendinopathy, which we'll talk about, tears in my adductors and hamstrings, rolled ankles, slap tears in my shoulders, like so many injuries. And, that's what we wanted to talk about today. So, Phil, do you want to talk a little bit about what microloading is and what I was referring to there by that?
Yeah, to clear up some jargon we're just throwing out there, but if you have listened to the podcast before, you'll know all about it. But the idea of microloading is when you think about what's putting a stress through a tissue, we look at either macro loading or micro loading. So macro loading is going to be basically all the programming side of things. So how many sets, reps, the total amount of weight or leverage sort of loading on the area, the amount of rest you have, all of those things. So there's big picture, how much you're putting on that particular movement. But then microloading is the idea that basically with different techniques or different positions that you complete that exercise, you'll load different structures differently. So the example we often use is with this is like you might program a pull-up, but depending on which way you have your hands, so whether it's supinated grip, neutral grip, or pronated grip, that will be a very different effect on the kind of combination of muscles you'll use between your elbows, your shoulders, to pull you up. And then also within the pull-up itself, it might not even be that difference of grip, but also how you're executing the technique with keeping your shoulder, your axioscapular muscles, so your shoulder blades back and down, will impact how much you're using your shoulders versus your muscles of your elbows. And using, I guess, the technique of the whole body hold will minimize the amount of energy leak you get through the system. So it's this idea of like all these different technique cues are there for a reason to, I guess, either maximize the efficiency of the movement or to change slightly how you're loading structures.
Yeah.
Or not slightly, sometimes in a large way.
Yeah.
And that's a way that you can complete the same exercise that's in your program, but tweak it slightly to be able to keep training while managing your injury.
Mm-hmm. So another injury that I got, and I'm pretty sure this was the next one after my wrist, was that I developed forearm tendinopathy or golfer's elbow. It was on the medial side, which is like the symptoms that you may be able to relate to if you've had this yourself, is that on the inside
Seems to be
of my
most of our audience.
Sorry?
Seems to be most of the audience.
On the inside of your forearms, and especially right up near the elbow joint there, like it's almost like when you touch up near the bone, is just agonizing when you grip something and try and pull with it. And so I developed that, and I did everything wrong in the sense that when I started to feel the pain come on, I just pushed through it. I didn't change the load. I didn't change micro loading. I didn't, make any modifications. I just said, I'm just going to keep going. And I got it to a point where it was so bad that I just couldn't do the things that I was doing. And then I just completely stopped. And then after working with you and understanding the strategy, after I'd rehabilitated that, I was lucky enough to get tennis elbow about 6 or 12 months after that, which is forearm tendinopathy on the lateral side, on the outside of your arms. But I was much more aware of what I needed to do. And so when I went to you and you asked me, how did it come on? When did you first notice it? And I said, I was doing a neutral grip bicep curl on a 45-degree bench, and it just got to a point where it was agonizing. And you said, try doing a supinated grip and see how that works. And I did, and it was fine. I could do supinated grip bicep curls. If I went to a neutral grip or a pronated grip, it was just agonizing. And you explained the way that the muscles are used and how it affects lateral forearm tendinopathy. And with that change in microloading, meaning basically the change of hand position, I was able to train around it, and then also adding one or two other things in there, to help with the rehab process. So it's a very, very powerful thing, isn't it? If you compare that to the idea of, I'm just going to stop, wait till the pain goes, and then try again, and then you just keep going on that hamster wheel of... Yeah,
which particularly for tendinopathy, if you've listened to us talk about tendinopathy before, you'll know that's probably the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
But as a general, larger picture looking at injuries, it is just so common, and I think it's been sort of, how a lot of conventional medicine and physio has gone in the past of, really stopping what you're doing and then probably underloading the structures of your body in the once you've been injured. And that underloading, basically is really detrimental to your progression, obviously, but also it's just detrimental to your exercise practice and becomes really depressing, and you can just totally fall out of love with going to the gym or doing whatever sport you like, because it's just so frustrating. And then often the kind of cycle that will happen is you'll get a bit bored with it, and then you'll just push yourself harder and then hurt yourself again. It's this vicious cycle. So the approach that we use at ADPT, and what we really have tried to instill on this podcast over the 300 plus episodes we've done now, is that idea of rehab is not putting in the naughty corner, doing activation exercises and doing something totally that doesn't even resemble your regular training. It's training in the presence of injury, but understanding what you need to to do what you need to just change out slightly to be able to still work towards your goals. And that's true in strength and flexibility, but it's so important when it comes to skill development, because if you, as we talked about yesterday with skill development, like it's all about frequency. And if you take a whole bunch of time off and you're unable to practice your skill, you just go so far backwards. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is really, it's really critical to your success, because if you train for calisthenics skills, in my opinion, injuries are a probability, not a possibility. They're something that you are going to encounter. If you push your body to that upper limit of its capacity, eventually you're going to do something. You're going to, tweak something or...
Yeah, we've talked about how calisthenics can be particularly challenging with getting the load right because of with a weight lift. So with a barbell or dumbbell or kettlebell, you can go up by incremental kilos, but with body weight, like you're working with leverage, which can just really suddenly blow out like the amount of load you're putting through. So
yeah, it's really challenging. And so this understanding this stuff is really, really important to do. And if you look at, you might be thinking to yourself when you hear all this stuff, well, how can I use that information? So I'm going to tell you guys my understanding of how to deal with like we're talking about just like muscle spasms, tweaks, things that you might not think, okay, I need to go to a physio for, but it also is preventing me from being able to train. I'm going to tell you my understanding of it, and then we'll see what Phil thinks of it, because my understanding of it so much has been shaped by talking to Phil and having him as a friend and a colleague that I work with. And that would be like, so, let's say you're working on your flexibility goals. This is something that a lot of people relate to, and they end up, describing that they've pulled a muscle or, whatever the correct terminology would be. That's usually what people say, I pulled a muscle. What do I do? What do I do from here? Now, the old me would have rested and just avoided that movement and gone on with everything else. Whereas the new me, with my current understanding, would be I would let it settle down for a couple of days. I wouldn't push it too hard for a couple of days, but I would still move. I would still do some kind of mobility on it. And as long as it didn't feel really bad in a couple of days, if it felt like it had improved slightly, then I would do some loaded mobility work, loaded stretching. So I'm actively using the muscles. I'm not just pulling them out into their, basically just stretching them out. And I would do that at a reduced intensity. So I would do it somewhere where I experience the discomfort, where I go, okay, yeah, I can feel that that's the muscle that I've, pulled or whatever it is. But this isn't making it worse. And when I finish this workout, it doesn't feel like it's gotten worse. And then each day, each workout, I would hopefully increase the intensity or the load that I can put on it. How does that sound, Phil?
Yeah, I like it. And this is something that's, obviously when I started doing all this study and, I had one idea of what kind of old school physio was like, but the thing that really opened my eyes to just how how important it is to not totally go backwards while you're injured was working with a physio when I tore my hammy. So pulled a hammy or tore a hammy. I'd done a decent sort of job of it. And this was when I was training for ultimate frisbee, playing sort of national level stuff. And I saw this physio, and it was like probably day 2 or 3 post injury. And this was someone who Leroy recommended me to see, Merrin Aldridge is the name, and because he was too busy. But she basically got me going down to the park and doing almost like a sprint session, except we were doing lateral shuffle movement. So basically just, you kind of side to side and going as fast as possible, which, when you've just torn your hammy, you kind of think like, oh, that's me done for being out on the pitch, and that's going to be really slow controlled movement. But she's like, well, the thing that tears your hammy is deceleration and lengthening under tension. But what we want to do is make sure that when you're ready to go for your tournament, that you're still moving fast, your hips are still conditioned, your calves, all those muscles are, you've still got a level of fitness, and you've still got that, conditioning and speed. And we don't want to lose that element of speed, because for my skill of having to sprint around playing frisbee, if I didn't have that speed, then like if I didn't train for that speed, then I'd likely injure myself when I tried to get back to it. So her rehab approach was basically like from day dot, I was, out there doing like fast sessions on the side to side. And it was just so like exciting and kind of liberating, because I was like, oh, I thought I was just going to have to like, lie on my back doing, double leg glute bridges for, weeks. And so this idea of like really understanding the, like what the movement is or what the contraction type is, or that aggravates your injury, and thinking, okay, like I can't do that specific variable, be it range of motion, be it like intensity of weight, but there's so many other elements that I can do. So and that's where the real skill of understanding how you keep training while injured it really comes into it. So remember, this isn't medical advice. You haven't done a consultation with me, so please, don't
Take it with a
go out
grain of
there
salt,
and start doing. If you've got a serious hamstring tear, don't go lateral bounding just for without having it assessed. But this idea of understanding which variables do cause the injury to be flared up and which ones don't is just so key for being able to continue your training and continue working on all of those elements you need to execute your skill, but just bring it back a little bit on the things that hurt.
I mean, one of the things that I did when I developed tendinopathy, the medial tendinopathy, and I really couldn't do my pull-ups, was that for a while I worked on single arm scapular pull-ins. So I was still doing something that involved gripping and pulling, and I was still strengthening what is generally quite a weak part of the kinetic chain that is involved in the pull-up, which is that scapular control, that depression and retraction. And so when I came out of that injury, as I started coming out and started being able to do pull-ups, I certainly hadn't lost ability with it. It was, I was able to do something that really kept driving me towards my goal of the one-arm pull-up.
And that's just like the perfect example of the right way to do it. Because if you think about something like that movement you just described, you're gripping hard, so you're using the muscles in your forearm to grip, but you're not putting them into a stretch load, which is then going to cause compression of the actual tendinopathy itself, which we know that compression and stretch is often one of the things that's the most aggravating for tendinopathy. So you're putting some load through the muscle, but in a non-aggravating sort of way, and then you're working on the rest of the system. You're working on that kinetic chain, and when we talked about pull-ups before, we were saying, it's often that inability to properly retract and depress and hold those axioscapular muscles in a strong way that then causes you to use more load through your elbow flexors than your shoulder extensors. And so it's just a perfect example of how you're still conditioning that system and you're working on the weak links and you're doing something that still feels like training, but you're just giving a bit of room for your and the right stimulus for your injury to sort itself out. So perfect example.
Man, did it pay off for me, And I mean, another example, we get asked, people in the gym ask me, why do we have parallettes here in the gym? And there are some exercises that you do specifically on parallettes, like, for example, a deficit handstand push-up where, you need the head to be able to go lower than the level of the ground for it. But the main reason why we have parallettes here is to basically change the micro-loading on the wrists and the arms for movements like planches, like handstands and like push-ups, because people often experience pain in their wrist when they go into wrist extension and load it up. But if you can put that hand into a neutral grip and grip onto a parallette, often that same person goes, oh wow, I can do this now.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to think about, that like the wrists are often the thing that does slow people down. And you got to think about like in the training context of the full UMS, like if you're doing a low bar squat, for example, or most, especially low bar squat where you're in loaded wrist extension, and then you're doing, maybe some stretches as well where you're loading through your hands, and then the next day you're doing on Monday you're doing vertical push where you've also got loaded wrist extension, and then on Wednesday you're doing planche where you're doing loaded wrist extension, and Thursday you're doing bench press where you got loaded wrist extension, and then you got Friday, you're probably getting a stretch in there as well that has some kind of loaded wrist extension. So when thinking about training programming, you got to think like, okay, we always want to try and give our like stimulus and response, and it is often that accumulation of things that you maybe don't realize you're doing at the time, even like the with the warm-ups when people are doing the horizontal running, I kind of recommend sometimes just doing it on your fists, sometimes doing it with your wrist, just to vary it up, because it is those things that can start accumulating, and then you start to do, a handstand masterclass on the Saturday, and it's just so much loaded wrist extension. And so that's the reason why we have a whole pile of parallettes out the back, so people can still do the movement, but just changing that micro loading parameter so you can just give that variability to not overload.
Yeah, love it. Well, thanks for that, Phil. I think that was some really useful information. If you've listened to this, I can guarantee you that, like, you might be sitting here questioning, okay, but how do I deal with this specific injury? Now, the further and further that I go down this road of dealing with injuries, the more that I'm understanding that, again, very general advice here, and I'm not even a physio, so you can't even say that you got physio advice for me. Couldn't be more general. But the idea of you don't necessarily need to know exactly what it is you need to do. It's about just changing the micro loading and changing the intensity, the volume, basically the load, and seeing what you can do that doesn't make your injuries worse, but that allows you to keep training. And if you approach your training with injuries with that kind of a mentality, and also when necessary work with a really good physio, then you're going to find that you get to your calisthenics goals far quicker, and the journey is far less frustrating, because it's not filled with this, okay, I can train now because I don't have an injury, and oh crap, I can't train now because I've got a muscle spasm or a minor tear or whatever it is.
Yeah, and just what you said there about training through pain, that's a question that I often get, is like, oh, how do I know if it's okay or not? And sorry, I've still got something in the back of my throat. The idea of this concept of irritability that I've mentioned a few times, which is basically how quickly does the pain come on, how intense does it get, and how quickly does it go away, gives you a sort of sense of if something is very irritable, then you really want to back it off and be quite careful with it and do something that's further away from that sort of movement. So you really want to change out the technique or the load or all those parameters that we've talked about. But if it's like, it takes quite a long time for the pain to come on, it doesn't get too bad, and then it quickly goes away, then it's less irritable, and you can have a bit more sort of leeway with it and do things that more resemble what you're trying to do. So that's just to give you a bit of a practical takeaway of this idea of, training in the presence of injury. If it's something that's really irritable, that's a good sign that you should definitely know what you're dealing with, get it checked out, and work with it there. And
if you want to get an online consultation with Phil and Alesh, go to adpt.physio. Couldn't recommend it highly enough. It'll be some of the best money and time that you spend if you're serious about your training and you want to learn to understand your
that's
injuries.
What I do with online physio, it might seem a bit weird for people who associate physio with getting poked and prodded and needles and all that. But basically, we figure out exactly what's going on. We look at your program, and this is all the stuff we do, is picking different variations of movements. And then I also have a folder where you can then upload videos of yourself doing it, so I can look exactly how you're doing it and make sure that those micro loading factors are ticked off. So that's how it works. And I think it's a really good topic, because it's something that Rad and I'm currently dealing with a knee injury and trying to come to terms with how to still do the things I want to do. So it's
brutal,
it's a journey, and you're always learning more. So do just the biggest takeaway is figure out a way to keep training and still love your movement practice.
Yeah. Perfect, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you again tomorrow for another great show. And to wrap up the week, everybody in our UMS online coaching program, come and jump into the Facebook group where we're about to go live and give you your specific coaching. Have a great day, everyone.
Health is about performance, not just body image.
You better be willing to accept what you're going to have to do to get there.
We'll start focusing on movement goals, strength goals, flexibility goals.
When you nail that skill, that's there forever.
The body image goal doesn't get you that far.
It's the consistency and frequency that's going to get you there. It's not the intensity.
There's no shortcuts to mastery and movement. Destination doesn't change overnight, but your direction will.
The gym is not the place to beat up the body that you hate. It's the place to build the body that you love.
We are the gym that teaches people how to move instead of just exercise, because we believe that health is about performance, not just body image.